What is the worst thing at an engagement dinner? Rejection? No, it is watching your future husband hold your sister by the hand, begging for a pause to love her instead. Right before 50 New York elites, they trampled my pride to celebrate their betrayal. But what that scum did not know was that his career-defining contract was in my pocket, right next to the legal deed to the very venue he was standing in. Hello and welcome back to Violet Revenge Stories. YouTube recently disabled our monetization, so if you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hard-working staff and keep bringing these tales to life. You can help by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description and comments below. My name is Scarlett Ward, and I am 32 years old. The air inside the Calum Vault tasted of expensive truffle and chilled vintage champagne. As a quiet investor, I always preferred the shadows, letting others bathe in the spotlight. Tonight, that spotlight belonged to my fiancé, Julian Vance. We were hosting our engagement menu tasting. Surrounded by 50 of New York's most influential elites, the vault was an underground architectural masterpiece, a labyrinth of exposed mahogany, modern art, and dimmed ambient lighting that felt both intimate and overwhelmingly powerful. Everyone whispered about the exclusivity of this venue, about the waiting list that stretched for years, and the anonymous owner who curated its flawless aesthetic. What Julian, a ruthlessly ambitious real estate developer, did not know was that the anonymous owner was sitting right next to him. I owned every inch of the marble beneath his Italian leather shoes. I kept my identity hidden, a silent observer in my own kingdom, simply playing the role of a lucky consultant who scored a favor. Dinner was progressing beautifully. The crystal chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over the long tables. Then, the sharp, clear sound of silver striking crystal sliced through the low hum of elegant conversation. Julian was standing, a glass of champagne in his hand. The room fell perfectly silent. I looked up at him, expecting a toast to our future, a declaration of love tailored for the tycoon sitting across from us. Instead, his jaw was tight, and his eyes darted nervously toward the far end of the table. "I need to say something," Julian began, his voice echoing slightly against the vaulted ceilings. "Scarlett and I have shared wonderful moments, but I must be honest with myself, and with all of you. I need to pause this engagement." A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the room. My breath caught in my throat, not from heartbreak, but from sheer disorientation. Pause. Julian reached his hand out. From the shadows of the adjacent seating area stepped Chloe, my biological sister. She was a pragmatic socialite who lived her life like an endless audition for a reality show. Chloe walked up to the head table, her eyes already shining with perfectly manufactured tears. Julian took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in front of 50 shocked VIP guests. "Chloe and I have undeniable feelings for one another," Julian continued, lifting his chin as if he were delivering a brave, tragic monologue. "We did not mean for this to happen, but true love cannot be ignored, and I cannot build a marriage on a lie." Chloe let out a delicate, trembling sob. "Scarlett, I'm so sorry," she whimpered, her voice dripping with artificial agony. "Please forgive me. We tried to fight it. We really did." She played the perfect victim, crying softly, begging for my grace, yet her grip on Julian's hand was like a steel vice. She was staking her claim in front of my friends, my business partners, and my world. My first instinct was to stand, to demand an explanation, to shatter the crystal glass in front of me. I shifted my weight, preparing to rise, but suddenly, two pairs of hands clamped down on my shoulders, forcing me back into my velvet chair. It was my mother and my father. "Sit down and shut your mouth," my father hissed directly into my ear, his fingers digging painfully into my collarbone. "Do not make a scene, Scarlett. Two of the biggest investors in the city are sitting right across from us. You will not ruin Julian's image tonight. Smile and nod." My mother leaned in from the other side, her perfume nauseatingly sweet. "Let them have this, Scarlett. Chloe needs him more than you do. Do not be selfish. In that fraction of a second, the world crystallized. The betrayal of a fiancé is a sharp, sudden wound, but the betrayal of a family is a slow, rotting poison. They were not protecting me. They were protecting him. They were protecting her. I was nothing but a sacrificial lamb on the altar of their greed. A profound, icy calm washed over my entire body. I did not shed a single tear. The searing pain evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying, absolute clarity. This public humiliation was not my destruction. It was my liberation. It freed me from the pathetic illusion of family loyalty. I calmly reached for my left hand, slowly, deliberately. I slid the heavy diamond engagement ring off my finger. Julian watched me, a flicker of nervous anticipation in his eyes, expecting me to scream or cry. Instead, I picked up his half-full glass of vintage red wine and dropped the diamond inside. It sank to the bottom with a quiet clink. I looked at Julian, then at Chloe, and finally at my parents. I gave them a soft, brilliant smile, stood up from the table, and walked out of the banquet hall without uttering a single word. My silence was louder than any scream. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind me, shutting out the stunned murmurs of the elite crowd. Standing in the private corridor, I breathed in the cool, quiet air of my domain. I raised my hand and signaled for my operations director, who was waiting discreetly by the security desk. He rushed over immediately, his expression laced with quiet concern. "Lock it down," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Silently freeze every single one of Julian Vance's privileges, accounts, and access codes in this building. Do not send him a notification. Do not let him know. Let him find out the hard way." The director nodded, tapping a swift sequence into his tablet. The first move of the endgame had been played. I retreated to the uppermost floor of the building, unlocking the heavy oak door to my private office with a biometric scan. This was the absolute nerve center of my empire. Julian had always smirked at my title as an art consultant, arrogantly assuming that my ability to secure this elite venue for our events was merely an employee discount. He thought it was a pathetic little perk from a generous boss who liked my taste in abstract paintings. He never possessed the intellect to look past the surface of my modest wardrobe or my quiet demeanor. Through a complex network of offshore accounts and a meticulously structured blind trust, I was that generous boss. I had built this establishment from the bare concrete up, turning it into the most coveted real estate in the city. I was not just an employee. I was the sole proprietor. Sitting behind my expansive desk, I opened my personal laptop and began pulling up financial records. Julian was not just a cheating partner. He was a desperate man balancing on a thin tightrope over a blazing inferno. His entire career was currently hanging by a single, fragile thread. He had liquidated every asset he owned and leveraged himself to the absolute limit to secure a booking here for next month. He planned to host a spectacular gala to launch his so-called project of the century, an event designed specifically to close a $1 billion investment fund. He desperately needed the prestige and flawless reputation of my venue to blind his European investors, masking the cracks in his own financial foundation. As I dug deeper into my own personal bank statements, crossing them with access logs, the true extent of the betrayal materialized on the glowing screen. This was no sudden spark of undeniable passion like he claimed downstairs. The digital footprints told a story of a disgusting, calculated affair that had been festering in the dark for 8 months. I noticed a series of exorbitant charges on my secondary credit card, a card I kept purely for emergencies and rarely checked. My pragmatic sister had used my own hard-earned money to purchase the vintage luxury watch Julian wore so proudly on his wrist tonight. She had funded their countless secret hotel stays and private dinners with the very wealth they thought I did not possess. The encrypted intercom on my desk buzzed quietly. It was Marcus, my private attorney, calling on a secure line. "I heard about the spectacle downstairs from the security team," Marcus said, his voice crisp, cold, and strictly professional. "Give me the word. Scarlett, I can terminate his gala contract in the next 10 minutes. We can cite irreconcilable differences. lock his entire production team out of the premises, and watch his career disintegrate by sunrise tomorrow. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, watching the city lights flicker through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The temptation to crush him instantly was a fleeting thought, quickly replaced by a much darker, far more satisfying strategy. "No," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of mercy. Canceling the contract now would just give him a convenient excuse to play the victim. He would tell his investors that a bitter, jealous ex-fiancé ruined his grand vision out of spite. The most ruthless move is not to shatter his hopes tonight. It is to build him a magnificent, golden staircase to the clouds. Let him climb to the very top, and then pull the ladder out from under him when he has nowhere else to step. Marcus paused, a deep understanding dawning in his silence over the line. "What do you want to do?" "Pull up the master rental agreement he signed last month," I instructed calmly. "Navigate to the 7th appendix. I want you to look at the section he skimmed over, because he was too busy boasting about his future wealth to read the fine print." I heard the rapid, precise clicking of a mechanical keyboard on the other end. "The Business Ethics Violation Clause," Marcus read aloud, a hint of dark amusement slipping into his professional tone. "Exactly," I murmured. "Trigger it silently. Do not send a formal notice to his legal team yet, but initiate the internal freeze immediately. I want every single cent of his massive deposit locked down tight in our holding accounts. If his project goes under, or if he tries to pull his funds to save himself, he will find a solid concrete wall." Julian was completely oblivious to the fact that he had legally signed away his own salvation. He thought he had outsmarted me, discarding a modest, quiet consultant for a flashy, high-maintenance socialite, but in reality, blinded by his own towering arrogance, he had just handed the executioner a perfectly tied noose. I closed my laptop, the soft click echoing in the empty, silent room. The game had not ended at the dinner table. It had only just begun. Less than 48 hours after the disastrous dinner, my parents summoned me to their sprawling estate in the Hamptons. The atmosphere inside the study was thick and suffocating, reeking of stale cigar smoke, expensive scotch, and desperate panic. My father paced the entire length of the vintage Persian rug, his face a mask of tight, controlled fury. My mother sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa, sipping her hot herbal tea with a blank expression, acting as if we were simply discussing the upcoming autumn weather. Neither of them asked how I was feeling. They did not inquire if I had slept or if my heart was broken. My emotional state was utterly irrelevant to the preservation of the family name. In this room, I was a logistical problem to be aggressively managed, not a human being to be comforted. "You need to make a public statement by tomorrow morning," my father demanded, stopping to point a rigid, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "You will post on all your social media platforms that this was a mutual, amicable split. You will explicitly wish Julian and Chloe the absolute best for their future. The financial press is starting to ask questions. Scarlett, we absolutely cannot afford to have Julian looking like a villain right before his major project launch next month. I was the one publicly humiliated, yet you want me to bless the exact people who did it?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm but laced with a heavy, leaden disbelief. "Do not be difficult," he snapped, his voice rising in volume until it rattled the crystal decanters on his desk. "This is not about your bruised ego. This is about business, reputation, and the absolute survival of this family. You will smile for the cameras, and you will protect them." I stared at the man who had raised me, slowly peeling back the thick layers of his aggressive posturing to see the terrified, hollow shell vibrating underneath. Thanks to a highly compensated private investigator who had delivered a comprehensive background dossier to my desk just 2 hours prior, I already knew the ugly, pathetic truth hiding behind his demands. My father was not acting out of a twisted sense of paternal love for Chloe or a genuine infatuation with Julian's business acumen. He was fiercely fighting for his own life. The confidential dossier revealed that my father had secretly embezzled roughly $3 million from his own corporate board over the past 5 years, to fund his extravagant lifestyle and cover mounting gambling debts. He was currently standing on the absolute precipice of a catastrophic personal bankruptcy and a lengthy federal prison sentence. Julian had somehow discovered this fatal weakness and made a devilish, calculated pact with him. In exchange for my father's unwavering public support and absolute silence regarding the affair, Julian promised to secretly funnel enough money from his upcoming $1 billion investment fund to cover my father's stolen millions. My father was quite literally selling his eldest daughter to buy his own freedom. I left the estate without giving them a definitive answer. The toxic air of my childhood home finally expelled from my lungs forever, but the relentless emotional assault did not end there. Early the next morning, my security buzzer rang. It was Chloe, standing on the front porch of my private brownstone. She pushed her way inside without waiting for an invitation, carrying a glossy legal folder and a small, faded velvet jewelry box. Her eyes were completely dry now, the theatrical, manufactured tears from the dinner completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating gleam. "I need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement," she said, slapping the heavy folder onto my marble kitchen counter. "It simply states that you will never speak negatively about Julian's business, his personal character, or our relationship to any media outlet or potential investor. If you sign it right now, I will give you back grandmother's pearl necklace and those vintage sapphire earrings you always liked." She opened the velvet box, displaying the trinkets as if she were offering me a royal fortune. The sheer brazenness of her offer hit me like a physical blow. She was attempting to buy my silence, my dignity, and my total submission with a handful of old gems that rightfully belonged to me anyway. Looking at her expectant, disgustingly entitled face, a profound and final realization settled deep into my bones, freezing my veins. I had never truly been a daughter or a sister in their eyes. I was nothing more than a convenient, disposable shield, a collateral asset, or an emergency reserve fund to be selfishly drained whenever their impulsive greed demanded it. Any lingering, pathetic shred of hope I had secretly harbored for a genuine familial bond withered and died right then and there. It was a painful, gut-wrenching severing of ties, but it brought an unparalleled sense of crystalline clarity. "Fine," I said, projecting a flawless aura of defeated exhaustion. "Leave the document here. I will have my lawyer look it over and send it back by 5 o'clock this afternoon." Chloe smiled, a victorious, sickeningly sweet smirk spreading across her face. "I knew you would be reasonable. Scarlett, you always were the sensible one." The exact moment she walked out the door, I scanned the physical document and sent it straight to Marcus via an encrypted server. I told him to accept the basic premise of the non-disclosure agreement, but instructed him to meticulously weave a highly sophisticated, lethal legal trap directly into the indemnification clause. We buried a heavily dense, exceptionally complex paragraph deep on the 7th page, entirely masked by thick, impenetrable legal jargon. The cleverly altered clause dictated that by legally enforcing my silence regarding his internal business practices, Julian explicitly and solely assumed full personal and criminal liability for any fraudulent activities, misrepresentations, or financial discrepancies related to his upcoming project. If he was lying to his investors, and I knew for an absolute fact that he was, this specific document would ensure that he could not legally deflect the blame onto his board of directors, his contractors, or his partners. I signed my name at the bottom of the page with a perfectly steady hand, a cold, predatory smile playing on my lips. Chloe truly believed she was securing Julian's golden future and protecting his empire. In reality, she had just personally hand-delivered his one-way ticket to a maximum security prison. The media blitz began exactly 2 weeks before the scheduled gala. Julian saturated the financial press with glossy advertisements and high-definition promotional videos, anchoring his entire $1 billion pitch on the undisputed prestige of my property. He paraded through the echoing halls of the Calum Vault with camera crews trailing behind him, aggressively pointing at my architecture as if he had conjured it from the ground himself. In a highly publicized interview with a leading business magazine, He arrogantly claimed that he had secured a strategic partnership with the notoriously reclusive owner of the venue. He spun a magnificent fairy tale for his European investors, weaving a narrative that his project was so revolutionary, it had earned the personal backing of New York's most elusive real estate titan. He had absolutely no idea that the titan he was boasting about was sitting quietly behind a monitor in the penthouse office, recording every fraudulent word that tumbled out of his mouth. While Julian was busy constructing his financial house of cards in the press, my sister was tirelessly working the social media angle. Chloe flooded her platforms with endless streams of perfectly filtered photographs. There were daily check-ins from the grand ballroom, close-ups of floral arrangements, and staged candid shots of her looking thoughtfully at catering menus. Her captions were heavily laced with passive-aggressive venom. She wrote lengthy posts about finding true love against all odds, emphasizing how a strong woman knows how to hold on to a high-value man, while a bitter, stagnant loser will simply fade into the background where she belongs. She wanted the world, and specifically me, to know that she had won the ultimate prize. I watched her digital gloating with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a moth flutter closer and closer to an open blue flame. She was decorating a beautiful slaughterhouse, completely blind to the sharpening blades. It was time to cast the net. I bypassed my internal servers and utilized an untraceable encrypted network routed through 3 different countries to contact Julian's primary backers in Geneva and London. I did not send them threats or anonymous warnings. I simply provided them with dry, devastating facts. I transmitted a set of highly confidential, independent audit reports that completely dismantled Julian's meticulously crafted valuation models. The raw data proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had artificially inflated the projected value of his developmental properties by exactly 4 times their actual market worth. I planted the seeds of catastrophic doubt right in the minds of the men holding the purse strings, leaving them just enough time to quietly investigate the discrepancies before the night of the gala. The ground beneath Julian's polished leather shoes was already disintegrating, and he could not even feel the tremors yet. Exactly 7 days before the event, I tightened the invisible noose. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the entire event production crew Julian had hired arrived at the loading docks to begin the massive internal build-out. As they swiped their expensive, all-access security cards against the biometric scanners, the panels flashed a harsh, unforgiving red. Every single credential associated with Julian Vance's team had been instantaneously downgraded to the lowest possible clearance tier. They could not access the freight elevators, the lighting grids, or the executive suites. Julian was furious. He stormed into the lower lobby, his face flushed with panicked rage, demanding to speak to the board of directors, the front desk staff, operating under my strict and direct orders, politely informed him that the management team operated strictly off-site. When he forcefully demanded the contact information for the venue's governing board, they handed him a generic corporate email address. He frantically typed out an aggressive, legally threatening message demanding immediate access. 5 seconds later, his phone chimed with an automated reply stating that the administrative servers were currently undergoing routine maintenance and his inquiry would be addressed within 3 to 5 business days. The illusion of control evaporated from his grasp in an instant, sweating and desperate. He retreated to a quiet corner of the lobby and pulled up my contact on his phone. My screen lit up in the darkened penthouse. "Scarlett," his text read, "there is a massive glitch with the security system down here. I need you to go to your boss or use whatever employee connections you have to manually override the freight doors right now. Do this for me, and I promise I will make it up to you after the launch. I know you are still upset, but do not let your petty emotions ruin a billion-dollar deal." He was still issuing orders, still treating me like a disposable subordinate, fully believing a hollow promise could bring me to heel. I did not type a single letter in response. I simply opened the message, ensuring the read receipt was delivered straight to his screen, and then I placed my phone face down on the mahogany desk. I let him stare at that tiny, silent notification, drowning in the suffocating realization that no one was coming to open the doors. The eve of the most important night of Julian Vance's life arrived, bringing with it a thick, suffocating wave of sheer desperation. He was completely backed into a corner, unable to legally access the main ballroom to set up his elaborate presentation due to the security freeze. He resorted to the pathetic tactics of a common street criminal. At exactly 11 o'clock at night, he cornered one of my senior shift managers in the subterranean loading bay. Sweat beaded on Julian's forehead as he aggressively shoved a heavy envelope containing exactly $50,000 in crisp, untraceable cash into the manager's hands. He frantically demanded that the service doors be left unlocked for just 1 hour, long enough for his crew to smuggle in their state-of-the-art audiovisual equipment. Julian firmly believed he was buying loyalty. He was completely unaware that every single employee in that fortress answered to me, and only to me, bound by fierce loyalty and ironclad contracts. Less than 5 minutes after the sleazy exchange took place, the manager walked directly into my penthouse office. He dropped the heavy envelope of bribe money right onto the center of my mahogany desk, accompanied by a crystal-clear, high-definition security tape of the entire transaction. The criminal liability I had cleverly engineered into his sister-in-law's non-disclosure agreement was now fully, legally activated. The true explosion, however, detonated at exactly 6 o'clock the following morning. The Wall Street Journal published its early morning edition, and Julian Vance's perfectly manicured face was plastered directly across the front page. The investigative piece I had meticulously seeded with the European auditors was no longer just a quiet, fearful rumor whispered in boardrooms. It was a massive, undeniable headline feature. The article ruthlessly exposed his entire $1 billion fund as a glorified, illegal capital-raising scheme. The financial journalist surgically dissected his artificially inflated asset evaluations, pointing out glaring, undeniable evidence of unregistered securities and highly fraudulent financial models. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated panic ripped through the elite financial sector of New York. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the stock prices of his closely affiliated partners were already plummeting in the pre-market trading hours. The wealthy tycoons who had once clapped him on the shoulder at my engagement dinner were now frantically dialing their aggressive crisis management teams, desperately trying to scrub their names and associations from his rapidly sinking ship. The devastating fallout hit the Ward family estate like a catastrophic hurricane. My personal phone began to vibrate incessantly on my desk. It was my father. I let it ring 4 times before finally pressing the green button, simply to hear the sheer, unmasked terror in his voice. The arrogant, demanding patriarch, who had ruthlessly ordered me to sit down and smile for the cameras, was completely gone. In his place was a pathetic, broken shell of a man. He wept openly, begging and pleading with me to drain my entire life savings and leverage every single professional contact I possessed to bail out his stolen funds. He knew that the moment the authorities began digging into Julian's collapsed empire, they would inevitably find the financial ties to my father's own corporate embezzlement. I listened to his frantic, humiliating sobbing for exactly 2 minutes. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer a single, solitary word of comfort. I simply hung up the phone and permanently blocked his number. I then calmly authorized my private courier to deliver a thick, heavily bound legal folder directly to his front door. Inside was a complete, legally binding set of personal bankruptcy filings I had meticulously prepared for him months ago, anticipating this exact, inevitable outcome. He was finally, completely on his own. Chloe was not far behind, completely unhinged by the rapidly collapsing illusion of her future billionaire lifestyle. She completely bypassed my residential brownstone and stormed directly into the downtown art consulting office I used as my quiet professional cover. She kicked the heavy glass door open, her expensive designer makeup smeared across her face and her eyes wild with a feral, uncontrollable desperation, before I could even stand up from my leather executive chair. She lunged forward across my desk and slapped me hard across the face. The sharp, burning sting radiated across my left cheek. But I did not even flinch. I did not raise a hand to strike her back. I simply sat there and stared at her with eyes as cold as dead winter. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice cracking aggressively as she violently swept a tall stack of expensive portfolios off my desk, sending papers flying everywhere. "You leaked those auditing numbers. You are deliberately trying to destroy the future of a great man because you are just a bitter, jealous shell of a woman. You are ruining my perfect life." She ranted like an absolute lunatic, spewing toxic venom and inadvertently confessing to half a dozen manipulative, deceitful schemes she and Julian had pulled behind my back over the past year. She was desperately trying to convince herself that they were still the tragic victims of my supposed cruelty, blinded by her own hysterical rage. She did not notice the sleek, black digital recording device sitting right next to my wireless keyboard. Its tiny red light blinked steadily, flawlessly capturing every single word of her idiotic, self-incriminating confession. I let her scream until her throat gave out and she was gasping for air. I did not lift a single finger to retaliate. Physical violence was the desperate weapon of the powerless, and I had an entire empire at my command. By exactly 12 o'clock noon, the public relations storm surrounding Julian had reached a deafening, catastrophic roar. His major investors were publicly threatening to pull out their capital, and his legal team was in a state of complete, disorganized panic. He was standing directly on the jagged edge of the absolute abyss, right at the peak of his absolute terror, when he thought all was lost. I opened my encrypted administrative terminal. I drafted a brief, highly formal email from the official corporate account of the owner of the Calum Vault, sending it directly to Julian's private, heavily monitored inbox. Despite the current, unfortunate media speculation, the crisp message read, "The executive management team deeply values its strict contractual obligations. Rest assured, Mr. Vance's gala will proceed precisely on schedule tonight." Down in the expansive main lobby, my high-definition security cameras caught the exact moment Julian read the email on his smartphone. I watched his rigid shoulders drop, and he let out a massive, shuddering breath of pure relief that I could almost hear through the screen. He actually smiled. He looked up at the towering, vaulted ceiling like a man who believed he had just miraculously outsmarted fate itself. He genuinely thought he had squeezed through the narrowest crack in the collapsing wall. He believed his sheer charisma and a stroke of miraculous luck had saved his empire at the 11th hour. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive suit, adjusted his tie, and confidently stepped straight into the final, inescapable jaws of my perfectly set trap. The grand ballroom of the Calum Vault was entirely transformed into a breathtaking sanctuary of absolute extravagance. Hundreds of the most influential elites, international journalists, and European financial partners moved gracefully across the polished marble floors. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos carried silver trays laden with the finest caviar and vintage champagne. The air vibrated with the low, greedy hum of impending wealth. Standing on the elevated center stage, bathed in a brilliant pillar of white light, was Julian Vance. He looked immaculate in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo. Beside him stood Chloe, wearing a dazzling gown of spun gold, her arm wrapped tightly through his. They were the absolute picture of victorious royalty, gazing out at the sea of billionaires who were about to hand them the keys to a kingdom. The massive mahogany doors at the back of the hall were securely locked, but from my vantage point high up in the VIP gallery, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire slaughterhouse. I watched as the master of ceremonies gestured toward a sleek podium holding a thick, leather-bound contract. This was the moment, the official signing of the $1 billion syndicate agreement. Julian stepped forward, flashing a brilliant, triumphant smile for the flashing cameras. He reached into his breast pocket, drawing out a heavy gold fountain pen. He hovered the glittering tip exactly 1 inch above the dotted line, soaking in the absolute adoration of the crowd. He never made the stroke. Before the ink could even graze the pristine paper, I pressed a single, glowing red key on my master control tablet. Instantly, every single light in the massive vault extinguished. A collective gasp ripped through the darkness. followed by the nervous murmurs of confused tycoons. For exactly 5 seconds, the silence was total and suffocating. Then, the state-of-the-art, 360-degree panoramic LED screens that lined the entire upper perimeter of the ballroom violently ignited. But instead of the sweeping, high-definition architectural renderings of Julian's fraudulent project, a stark, blindingly white legal document filled every single screen. It was magnified 1,000 times over, making the heavy black ink completely inescapable. It was the official, unredacted certificate of ownership for the Calum Vault, and printed directly in the center, glowing with the intensity of a dying star, was the name of the sole proprietor, Scarlett Ward. Before the crowd could even process the visual shock, the colossal surround sound system roared to life. It was not a grand symphony, but the crisp, highly amplified audio of my security recordings. Julian's arrogant, panicked voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "I am artificially inflating the assets by 400%. Those European fools will never look past the surface shell." The recording seamlessly transitioned into the dark, subterranean loading dock, playing the exact moment he handed over $50,000 in crisp cash to my manager. "Leave the doors unlocked. Nobody needs to know. I am buying my way into this venue." Then came the piercing, unhinged shrieks of my sister from my office just hours prior. "You are deliberately trying to destroy the future of a great man. We took your money because you are just a bitter, stagnant loser." The entire ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The European investors practically leaped away from the center stage as if Julian had suddenly contracted a lethal plague. Flashbulbs went off in a blinding frenzy, capturing the exact, horrifying moment the blood drained completely from Julian's face. He stumbled backward, dropping his gold fountain pen, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for the ghost he had tried to bury. High above them, the heavy double doors of the private VIP gallery slowly opened. A single, dramatic spotlight pierced the chaos, locking directly onto me. I wore a sweeping, floor-length black evening gown, its sharp, structured lines radiating pure, unadulterated power. A necklace of flawless black diamonds rested against my collarbone. I did not look like the discarded, quiet art consultant they had mocked at the dinner table. As I slowly descended the sweeping glass staircase, every single eye in the room locked onto me. I was the absolute sovereign of the empire they were desperately trying to steal, descending from my throne to deliver the final judgment. The tycoons at the front tables did not hesitate. The lead European partner snatched the leather-bound contract off the podium, ripped it perfectly in half, and threw the pieces directly at Julian's feet, before turning his back and storming toward the exit. The rest of the financial backers immediately followed suit, their furious voices blending into a tidal wave of ruin. Just as Julian opened his mouth to scream a defense that no one would ever believe, the grand entrance doors swung wide open. A squad of meticulously dressed federal economic police officers stepped into the hall, their badges flashing in the ambient light. They were fully armed with the extensive, ironclad dossiers of financial fraud and embezzlement I had anonymously provided them, covering both Julian's massive scam and my father's corporate theft. The lead detective walked calmly onto the stage, producing a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Julian Vance, you are under arrest for severe financial fraud, wire conspiracy, and illegal solicitation of unregistered securities," the detective announced, his voice projecting clearly across the stunned room. Chloe collapsed violently onto the polished marble stage, her golden gown pooled around her like a deflated parachute. The intoxicating dream of becoming a billionaire society wife shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of her. She began screaming hysterically, violently clawing at Julian's tuxedo jacket as the officers pulled his arms behind his back. She realized, with crushing certainty, that her perfect lover was now utterly penniless, publicly disgraced, and heading straight for a maximum security prison cell. Julian violently shrugged off the officers for just one fraction of a second. He dropped heavily to his knees, his expensive trousers hitting the hard floor. He looked up at me, his face slick with sweat and tears. his entire body trembling violently. "Scarlett, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, hollow sob. "Please, I will do anything. Call them off. I am so sorry. Show me mercy." I stopped at the bottom of the staircase, standing just 5 feet away from the wreckage of his life. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no triumph, just the pristine, glorious peace of surgically removing a malignant tumor. I did not utter a single word of insult. I simply raised my hand and gave a gentle, dismissive wave to the private security guards standing by. They immediately moved in, assisting the police in dragging the sobbing, broken couple out through the service exits. Turning my back on the pathetic display, I picked up a fresh crystal flute of vintage champagne from a nearby table. I raised the glass high into the air, addressing the stunned journalists and remaining guests who were standing in absolute silence. "My sincerest apologies for the unseemly interruption tonight," I said, my voice smooth, commanding, and perfectly pleasant. "It seems the trash has finally been taken out. Please, enjoy yourselves. Tonight, all drinks are my absolute treat." I did not stay to mingle. I walked away, taking the private elevator up to the highest outdoor balcony of the Calum Vault. The cold, crisp night air whipped through my hair as I looked out over the glittering, endless skyline of the city that now belonged to me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the spicy, robust red wine, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The past was completely, irreversibly severed. I was finally, absolutely free. Thank you so much for listening to the end of this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment and let me know. If you enjoyed this journey and want to help our channel survive since YouTube disabled our monetization, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the donation QR code right here on the screen or click the donation link provided in the description and pinned comment below. Your support pays our staff, helps them feed their families, and allows us to keep creating even better revenge stories for you. Have a wonderful day, and stay strong.